Hello, Music Theory 2, Music Theory 1 students. This is the second video for our class that is pre-recorded for Wednesday, November the 10th. In the previous video, I talked about Roman numerals and the function of chords in tonal music. So the three basic functions of chords being tonic, chords of tonic function, if you will, chords of dominant function, with the Horton and Ritchie textbook goes to in a lot of details, and then chords of predominant and also in that same category, elaborative chord function. If you're confused about those terms, then either read the textbook or go back and watch that video if you haven't already. But what I came up with and what I've showed with colors on the screen here is that in major, you can see these three types. Blue is our tonic function chords. Mostly our most important one is, of course, our tonic chord, which everything revolves around. Our dominant chords, chords of dominant function in major, are in red. And then our cadential predominance, 2, 4, and 6, is in dark green. And then what Horton and Ritchie calls elaborative chords. So these are chords that function a little bit like a predominant. They happen before dominance, but you'll see them happening before predominance in a prolongation and not at a final cadence. So the final cadence is more specific. And so this is why we are going to be focusing on final cadences this week. And so I'm going to be talking more about elaborative chords in week 10. Okay, so next week. All right. The biggest thing I want to take away from this is I want you to see that in naturally occurring in minor, there are no chords of dominant function. And that's because scale degree 7 is not raised in when it's naturally occurring in minor, and it must be raised in order to create a chord of dominant function. Okay, so now let me talk about our chords of dominant function. So we are focusing this week. I'm not going to talk about all the chords of dominant function. I'm going to talk about the chords of dominant function that are used at the final cadence. Okay, so that means that I'm only looking at the root position 5 chord, or the root position 5 in major as a major triad, and the root position 5, 7, which is a brand new chord. And I'm going to explain it in this video now. If you ever wondered where it came from, why you use this chord, we call the 5, 7. So let's first talk in major, because the chord of dominant function, the 5 chord, occurs naturally in major and is in fact a chord of dominant function. So if we're in F major here, our chord of dominant function in this case, or our 5 chord, is C, E, and G, which is scale degree 5, 7, and 2. The intervals of this is a major third for the bottom third, a minor third for the top third, and if we look from the root to the 5th, it's a perfect 5th. Okay, so for a chord, for the 5 chord to be a chord of dominant function, it must be that. Now notice when we're in minor, we don't have the major third on the bottom, it's a minor third on the bottom. So this is not a chord of dominant function when we're in minor. Okay, it has to match exactly the major key here. Now from chapter 8, I didn't talk about these chords so much, I just gave you voice leading. So if you remember, when you have 2, 1 in the soprano, one of the other voices, so in this case the tenor, is taking the 7 to 8. The bass is doing 5 to 1, or sometimes 5 to 8. It can go up or down. And the final voice, and you had to do it this way, and this was very particular, but we needed the third in the chord. So we doubled scale degree 5, right? So the 5 is in the root. The 5 is the root, and it's in the bass. And one of those inner voices takes scale degree 5 and doubles it, and then it resolves 5 to 3. Okay, so then you have a tripled root and a third as your final triad. And it's really a final third is all it is, right? It's root to third, but 4 voices stating that. Now, the 5, 7 chord came out of this 5 to 3 resolution. Because if you know from all of your melodic figures that we've studied, when you have a third and someone's decorating, and people decorated very naturally in the Renaissance and into the Baroque, They would, because at a cadence this is so important, they would just fill in that third, 5, 4, 3. Okay, so you have 5, 4, 3. And once we get to class, I will actually play this so you can hear how this sounds, but it'll be very clear in your ears. You'll have heard it a lot. So what happened is this filled in third goes 5, 4, 3, and that scale degree 4 ended up becoming part of the 5 chord. So the 5, 7 has 4 voices, and it's scale degree 5, 7, 2, and now 4. And the voice leading that must happen is 4 must resolve down to 3. It can't go up to 5. Don't ever let it go up to 5. There are exceptions, which I'll talk about in the next week. But at a final cadence, when you're using a 5/7 chord, that 4 must resolve to 3. Okay, so you'll see that this then moves over to the strong beat, and you have like here, and that 4, the top voice, scale degree 4, must resolve down to 3. And in major, that'll be a minor second. Okay, so there's a really strong pull there. So that 4 is called a tendency tone because that 4 must resolve to 3, just like 7 must resolve to 8. And the 7 to 8 and the 4 to 3 are non-negotiable. Okay. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but that's non-negotiable. Those have to do that. Of course, there are exceptions, which I'm going to talk about soon as well. But 4 to 3 actually is more non-negotiable than at a final cadence. 4 always must resolve to 3. There are no other options. 7 is another matter. Okay, so that's the intervals that are unique and make up our chord. So if my tonic is do, mi, so, and my dominant chord is so, ti, re, and then it's fa. So if you hear that, so, ti, re, fa, that is the only 7th chord in tonal music that sounds like that. And we call that a major minor 7th. It's for the major triad at the bottom and the minor 7th. That's from the root of that 5 chord to the 7th. Okay, so that's why it's a major minor 7th. There are major 7s. There are minor 7s. There are half diminished 7s. There are fully diminished 7s that occur, and those chords, there's multiple of them when in naturally occurring when in tonal music. Okay, when you add 7ths to chord, the one that is unique is the major minor 7th, and so it's always our dominant function chord. It becomes very, very, very important in tonal music and in moving from key to key. Okay, and you'll learn about that more in music theory too. Now, in minor, our chords of dominant function here have to be created. They do not, no chords of dominant function naturally occur. And so you will never find a major minor 7th unless you raise that scale degree 7. And sometimes you even have to lower scale degree 4, okay, in order to create it. So because you need to create that major triad on the bottom and the minor 7th from the root to the 7th. Okay, so in minor, naturally occurring is a minor 5. That's just an elaborative chord. Once you raise scale degree 7, notice how this looks a whole lot like, or exactly the same now as our major 5, right? In our major key. So now we have a major 3rd and a minor 3rd. Perfect. Now we have a chord of dominant function in minor. So you've been raising scale degree 7 back for numerous chapters now, right? At the cadence, you've been raising scale degree 7. So you want to continue to do that. When you get to your final cadence, the 5 chord, you need to raise scale degree 7 to 8 if you're in a minor key. If you're in a major key, it's already there. You don't have to worry about it. Again, our 5/7 comes exactly the same way in major as in minor. It comes from that 5/4/3. And now notice we have created the exact same. So again, this is the exact same chord as you see up here. Okay. In terms, I say not exact same chord, but the exact same makeup. So you have the major triad on the bottom, major third, perfect fifth, minor seventh. Okay. And just raising that scale degree 7 is what does it when you're in a minor key. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. You do not have a chord of dominant function in minor unless you raise scale degree 7. Okay. And at the cadence, that's all you have to do. Okay. We'll talk more about chords of dominant function and the different, because they can be in different inversions once we get into prolongations. But at the final cadence, and this is what we're focused on this week, at the final cadence, the dominant chord must be a root position 5 chord, a major root position 5 chord if you're in a minor key, so you need to raise scale degree 7, or a 5/7 chord, okay, which includes the 7th or scale degree 4 in the key that you're in. Okay. I want to show you how things move from chapter 8 into now tonal music, because you could still do your final cadence like you learned in chapter 8, but you now have a bunch more options. When you were in chapter 8, this was your only option. And this is kind of your reference sheet. And I did it in minor because I think it's important for you to see that raising of scale degree 7. When you're in major, you don't have to worry about it. But when you're in minor, you do have to worry about it. So it's better to be practicing in minor so you remember, oh yeah, I'm in minor, I have to raise scale degree 7. But this works the same way in major as in minor. It's just that in major, you don't have to sharp scale degree 7. So in this case, we're in D minor. Okay, so our 5 chord is A, C sharp, and E, right? So A, C sharp, E. When we resolved this from chapter 8, and we had a 2/1 in the soprano, and I'm showing this both with 2/1 in the soprano and 7/8, because you have different options, and you'll see why in a moment. But we said 2/1, an inner voice has to take 7 and 8. In this case, the alto is taking it, but the tenor could take it. And our final voice did 5/3. That was your only option. And that was when scale degree 5 is doubled. The thing is, you can also double scale degree 2 now. Okay, so in this case, we've doubled scale degree 2. So in this case, the soprano and the tenor has scale degree 2. So the option now, you have another option where if you're just using a 5 triad, then 2 can go to 3. You don't want it to go to 1, because if 2 went to 1, you'd have parallel octaves. But if you're doubling scale degree 2, 2 will go to 1 in one of the voices, but 2 can also go to 3 in an inner voice, only in an inner voice. And then the other option, 7 can go to 8. So again, we still have we have D tripled root, okay? And then we have our F here, okay? So tripled root and then our third, because 2 is going to 3. So 5 can go to 3 or 2 can go to 3, but you need that scale degree 3 in this case, if you're preserving the full clause olivera, and that'll be important in a moment. Now, once you have the 5/7, which is the new chord that we just learned, remember 4 must go to 3. So whichever inner voice has scale degree 4, and it'll be an inner voice because we're at the final cadence. And so in the final cadence, the soprano is going to be 2/1 or 7/8, and the bass is going to be 5/1 or 5/8. So one of the inner voices will have to have that 4 going to 3. And the other voice is going to have 7 to 8. So there's no doubling here. Now we're going to get to 2 really interesting exceptions. Something that happened is composers said, wait, I'm on the final triad of the whole piece and I'm missing the chordal 5th. That bugs me. I want the chordal 5th there. So what they started doing is they said, well, the soprano is already getting, in this case shows it very clearly, soprano is already getting that strong tonic. The bass is already saying the strong tonic. So if scale degree 7 is in an inner voice, and only if it's in an inner voice, and again, only at the authentic cadence. You cannot do this with prolongations, and I'm going to mark it wrong every single time you do that, which is going to be lots of points off. Only at the cadence and only in an inner voice, scale degree 7 can go to 5 because your ear can't really hear that. So this is a new voice leading thing, only at the final cadence though. And then of course, 4 has to go to 3, 5 is going to 1, and 2 is going to 1. Okay, one other thing I want to talk about. So notice this right here. So that's new here. This is new here, the 7 to 5. And what's new here is our new 4 to 3, which is new there. And here it's our 2 to 3. That is a new option. Okay, and I'm all of these are simply new ways of new voice leading ways at our cadence. So if we have a triad, and this will look a lot like we had here, if we had a triad, and again, the composer is saying, hey, I want a full triad at the final cadence. So we have a 5 triad here, okay? Then one voice, well, so you can say, well, I'm already on scale degree 5, and 5 is shared between a tonic chord and a dominant chord. So why don't we go from the dominant scale degree 5 to scale degree 5? That's great. Now we have the root and the 5th, but we still need scale degree 7 in here, which is here. So 7 would normally go to 8, but if it went to 8, we'd have a tripled root and the chordal 5th, and we don't have the 3rd, and the 3rd has to be there. So again, only if scale degree 7 is in an inner voice, scale degree 7 can move up. It has to move up because 7 normally goes to 8 in this case, and 3 is a lot farther away. So 7 must move all the way up to 3 instead. Again, only in an inner voice. So in this case, I'm showing 2 exceptions to our rules. But 7 can go to 3, and this is only when you don't have, generally you're only going to see this when you don't have a 5/7. It'll be a 5 triad that this is allowed, and it's only when the soprano has 2 to 1. Of course, because if the soprano has 7 to 8, which you're going to see in a second, then the 7, you can't double scale degree 7. Okay. So the only 2 voices, again, a reminder, the only 2 voices that can be doubled is scale degree 2 and scale degree 5. And if you're using a 5/7, you're not going to have any doubling in there because you need scale degree 5, 7, 2, and 4. So that's 4 voices and 4 notes. So now let's look at your options when you have 7 to 8 in the soprano. Okay, so when 7 to 8 is in the soprano, so it's up there. From chapter 8, so again, we're looking at chapter 8 here. That's funny that did that. Okay, from chapter 8, 7 to 8 is not the soprano here. Then again, this is how you had to close. So this is your first that was your first experience with cadence voice leading. Well, now here, remember 2 can go to 3. So if scale degree 2 is doubled, then in this case, both your inner voices are going to have scale degree 2. One is going to close that clausa levera, okay? And the other one is going to go 2 to 3. Okay, so, and you learned about the 2 to 3 above, so that's another option for you. Here, if when there's no doubling with our 5/7, it's the same as in major. 7 goes to 8, we have a 2 going to 1, we have 4 going to 3, and we have 5 going to 1 and 5 going to 8. Someone might say, hey, but why can't 2 go to 5 and then we have a full chord? 2 going to 5 creates parallel fifths with 5 going to 1. So 2 to 5 is never allowed at a final cadence because against a 5 to 1 or a 5 to 8, you're creating parallel fifths. Okay, so that's an important thing to remember. So 2 to 5 is never allowed at a final cadence because of the parallel fifths. Okay, so this is just the same here. So 2 to 1, 7 to 8. And so if you do a 5/7 in minor, and there's, a 5/7 in major or in minor, but you have 7 going to 8 in the soprano, you are always, or you're just going to have to be satisfied with the fact that you have a tripled root and a third. So you're never going to have a fifth with a 5-7 to 1 in major or minor. Okay, so when 7 is going to 8 in the soprano. So that's why you'll notice above I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options. I only have 4 options here. Okay. Because this is an extra option because 7 could go to 5, 5, 7. If you want scale degree 5 to be doubled again, now we have a 5 triad, and now 5 can go to 5 and 2 can go to 3. So notice these are our 2 new options, or the same options as above. But this also works with a 7 to 8 close, because 2 against 7 and 3 against 8 creates parallel 6, which is fine. Okay, so it means that this option, we don't have a true clausal of error, right? We don't have that true close because we don't have a voice going 2 to 1. It's now okay. For almost all the other options, you're always going to have 2, 1 against 7 to 8. Oh, I guess here when 7 isn't going to 8 and 7, 7 is going to 3 or 5 instead. Again, that's also not showing we don't have that true close anymore, but it's implied in there. Okay, so I'm hoping that this page of the handout will be really helpful, because these are the only ways that you can resolve your 5 to 1. You have more options. That's 7 to 5 and 7 to 3 when you're with a 2, 1. And then you have other options for scale degree 2. So if you double scale degree 2, it can go to 3 as well as to 1. And 5 doesn't always have to go to 3. It can go to 5. It can stay on 5, but then you have to make sure another voice is going to the third of the chord. Okay, so hopefully that summarizes your chords of dominant function and how they're used and voiced at a final cadence, which is everything that you're going to be practicing this week, and what your assignment is due on Monday. Okay, in the next video, I'm actually going to be applying using elaborative chords, or not, well, kind of elaborative chords, but the pre-cadential dominant chords, as well as 2 new chords, or actually 1 new chord, the cadential 6-4. So you're going to use second inversion chord, a cadential 6-4. Okay, so see you in the next video.